In this episode, we interview Lee Cheesman. Cheesy is a neuroscientist with a huge amount of experience working with companies to improve their workforce performance through education around PTSD, depression, anxiety, addiction, and other stress disorders. She has an incredible story to share. She grew up in a cult, went through brain cancer while raising 2 boys on her own, and then became a successful businesswoman. Despite only just scratching the surface on her enormous amount of knowledge in this interview, she gives us some great information on the parts of the brain and their functions. She also talks about what happens in our brain when we are suffering from the symptoms of PTSD, depression, and anxiety, as well as how we can best support our brains to give ourselves the best chance of avoiding the impacts of these disorders. She also talks openly and vulnerably about her cancer healing journey and how she survived a diagnosis that is terminal for most people. Just to give a bit of context, she mentions in the podcast that the particular type of cancer she had has a 10% survival rate after 1 year. I did a bit of extra research after this interview and the actual stats are staggering. 5% of people survive 5 years and less than 1% survive 10 years. Cheesy is in that 1% and is healthier than ever. When I hear of a significant outlier like that, it makes me sit up and listen. Her story is fascinating and her healing journey really took her to the root of why she was sick and allowed her to heal. We discuss all of these things as well as delving right into the brain and talking about sleep, shift work and plenty more. Jason Anderson joined this interview by phone, while Josh Alpin and myself, Tim Stisher, were in the studio with Cheesy. Remember, your mental health is as important as your physical health, so please look after yourself and those around you. For further support, we have Pheasant available to us at any time. Enjoy. Okay, so welcome Cheesy. Thank you for coming along.
Thank you.
So we're giving a bit of an intro there, a bit of a background bio, but could you just tell us a bit about yourself, where you've come from and how you've ended up here?
Sure. So thank you for having me first up. Really excited to be here. Look, I've had a huge journey over my life with, I guess, trauma, and growing up in a cult is something that you don't acknowledge the trauma of it until you've actually left that space. So for the first 22 years of my life, I grew up in we basically followed a man. So he created a group of people who came together. So the beautiful thing about it was the community, and the fear of leaving that community is what keeps people in for a really long time. But the trauma associated with that is your family is not your family. The wider community is the ones who can provide any discipline. Basically any decision you want to make in your life, the community makes for you. So along with that goes your financial abuse, sexual abuse, emotional abuse, psychological abuse, any type of abuse that you can consider comes through this cult environment. So at the age of 22, I did actually leave, and it was the biggest decision that I've ever made in my life, because you lose everyone. Anyone that I'd ever known my entire life then wasn't allowed to associate with me anymore. So it was a phenomenal thing to do, but I had really bucked the trend of a female within the cult in that I did actually study and go to university, which was not, it was quite frowned upon. So it was something where my mother really supported me to actually do that, because she knew I was so fascinated in the body, and anything to do with the body and the brain I'd been researching since I was about 5 or 6 in the little Encyclopedia Britannicas that we all had in the 80s. So it was just something that was so fascinating to me. So I think, going to university, and then the first business that I started out of uni, I actually did that still in the cult, which was, again, very frowned upon. But I had my hands on people and I was fixing people, and I knew at that stage that there was more to life than what I was being presented in this environment where, you're following this man and you're becoming the bride of Christ, and, every decision is made for you except for the ones I balked at. So I think that there was a deep fascination for me over that time with regard to the human body and therefore the brain after a period of time. So I really went into the physiology and, neuroscience more so later on. So I think a lifetime of trauma up until the age of 22 really sort of drew me to how can we not have this prevalence in the world, really. We can see that PTSD is so significant, depression, anxiety, stress disorders, all of those things I experienced, and so therefore I knew that I needed to do something about it. So I went on and studied neuroscience in around 2010. That was after my studies in the 90s previously, and really looked at how we can work with the brain to reduce traumas in the body and in our life and the people surrounding us as well. So I guess I did neuroscience up until 2013, but it was all the science of it. It was all what I had learnt, what it was in my head, but the universe was trying to let me know some things. It was trying to show me that there was more than just the one person life that I had. I did have kids at the time as well, but from my perspective, the universe sort of gives us really quiet whispers, some messages, and I didn't listen because I was all stuck up in my head and in the science of it. And so on the 1st of January 2013, I walked out onto Oxford Street and got wiped out by a car. And I think that was the universe going, well, you didn't listen, so now I'm going to smack you over the head.
With a car.
With a car. So because I did hit my head, they actually did an MRI on my brain and found a brain tumour. And the beautiful thing about that is the oncologist and neurosurgeon said if you hadn't have been hit by the car, you would have died. So it was the best thing that had ever happened to me, the fact that I did get hit by this car, because they found the cancer and I had transsphenoidal surgery, so they went up my nose, so they didn't have to sort of cut into my head. It was the most easily accessible brain tumour. So I went through that process and had chemotherapy and had my 3 operations, but really understood that if I didn't get to the heart of the why was it that I had this in the first place, I wouldn't have actually survived this. So
can I just jump in there,
Yes.
Cheesy? Knowing your story a little bit, I think you're downplaying the fact that it was an easy tumour to get rid of.
Yeah.
But can you give an understanding of what type of brain cancer it was and the survival rate that you would generally expect from that cancer?
Yeah, so any cancers of the brain, they give you a 12-month survival rate. Mm-hmm. So 10% of people survive brain tumours, but they still give everybody 12 months. And so they just basically said, okay, you've got 12 months, we'll do what we can. But I basically went, nope. I almost swore. No, thank you. And so, yes, I had 10 months of chemotherapy. I had a GBM, so it was quite aggressive. So they think it could have been a grade 2 in there for up to 15 years. And then it's just become a grade 3 and then started spreading. So the reason I didn't see the car, I don't just randomly walk out in front of cars, but because it had impacted my optic nerve so significantly, I turned and actually didn't see a car. Wow. But there was a car there because my peripheral vision was completely gone. Mm-hmm. It was incredibly significant. I had 2 young boys. I was a single mum, and it was an incredibly difficult time. Yep. And, at times you think it might be harder to survive this than to actually push through. Yep. Because it was just so incredibly painful. And, these 2 little boys who were 4 and 6 were relying on me as their mum. But I think they also gave me a certain amount of strength. I had the strength within myself to push through, but also finding the why. It was in my control centre. So spending an entire life being controlled is going to get stuck in your body. Of course, it's going to go in my pituitary gland. So that's the control center of the brain, releases a significant amount of hormones. So yes, I had the surgery, but then I was on a lot of steroids because the hormone production was gone for a period of time. So there's 13 hormones that release from the anterior pituitary. So it was a significant impact to the brain, along with the chemo. I did refuse radiation, I'd just finished neuroscience. I was the worst patient in the world. But I said, you are not blast radiating my brain. And it was really interesting because the day I was a year in remission is the day they found my dad's brain tumour.
Wow.
Yep. So
same one or
no, he had an anaplastic astrocytoma, so we sent the genetics of it off to Belgium just to make sure they weren't the same.
Wow.
But yeah, and I told him my process. I told him what I went through. I never said don't have radiation. I said this is my journey, and then the bigger journey for me was the why, and that is what I feel like he also couldn't lean into and figure out, because they were in the cult probably for another 10 years after I left.
Wow. And once again, the control centre.
Oh, no, his was left temporal.
Right. Okay.
Words.
Yeah.
Word centre.
Oh, right.
Couldn't speak his words.
There you go.
Yeah.
So, Cheese, I just want to touch on you've mentioned your process and your journey through that when you found out you had cancer.
Mm-hmm.
Did you use any particular strategies or tools other than, digging in and leaning into that why? Was there anything else that helped you sort of move through that or navigate that process?
Yeah, look, at the time, medical cannabis wasn't as prevalent. So I did manage to get some cannabis with THC, and that assisted with the journeys of, unlocking the fear to work out the why. So I think you've got an internal grit to get through cancer. So you have to have that because it is difficult and it's scary. And the school where only one of my boys went there at the time, but they were brilliant. They used to deliver meals. They used to come and check on us. And I also had an au pair. So I think the au pairs were really good for, still surrounding me with love, knowing that the boys were being cared for. And yeah, the process was just do what I need to do medically, but then the most important part for me was what I needed to do emotionally and how I needed to heal.
And was it your experience through the cult, or was it your neuroscience study or something else that made you aware of the importance of working through those emotions? Why? My question is, why in your case were you so aware that the emotions were a big part of this, whereas in a lot of people's cases it's just we deal with the symptoms?
When you are sitting in pain and you are just, I guess you just start listening. Mm-hmm. So it was forced on me to listen. Because I'd studied science, it can block you from listening because you have to logically work out why everything is happening. But I really understood that me getting hit by a car wasn't just by chance. There was no coincidence there. Mm-hmm. So I hadn't been listening to the universe. I didn't understand that there was more, or, you brought up believing in this God thing, but then I'd completely shut that down. And I feel like getting hit by the car was a real wake-up call for, actually, no, there's more to this. Mm-hmm. So I hadn't listened for a long time, so I didn't realise there was an emotional aspect until the universe decided to hit me with a cosmic 4x2.
Yeah, cosmic car.
Unfortunately, it was a real car. I did see the guy a couple of months later. I was bald. I was all swollen. And I was walking up Oxford Street and he's like, "What did I do to you?" And I said, "You saved my life."
Wow. That's incredible. That's such a beautiful story. And then the process from there, you've obviously recovered. Mm-hmm. You're in remission. How long in remission now?
10 years.
Well done.
Thank you.
And the chances, do you know the percent chance of being in remission 10 years? Like, that's an incredible achievement.
Yeah. So it's still only 10% survival.
Yeah, that's amazing. Well done.
Yeah.
So then what else did you do? How else did you manage to... So digging into the why. And so we're going to get onto the neuroscience of all sorts of different mental illnesses as we go further. But for you, digging into the why, how did you actually do that through your process?
Yeah, so again, I was putting out, I guess, to the universe, what's the next step? Because I knew I was still holding so much pain and I knew I was still holding so much trauma. And my husband had been to Costa Rica to do the Spanish school a couple of times, and he just happened to say to me, I'm going to go back to Tamarindo, go and do the Spanish school so I can learn Spanish. That afternoon, I watched a normal podcast I watch, which is Two Bears, One Cave, with Tom Segura and Bert Kreischer, and Bert wasn't on it. And that's fine because I like Tom more than Bert anyway. And a man named...
they'll be listening, so just careful.
Sorry, Bert, love you. Ron White was on it with Tom, and he just started talking about this incredible experience that he'd had. He'd gone to Tamarindo in Costa Rica, and I was like, hang on, what? And he goes, yep, I went to Rhythmia Life Advancement Centre. And so I had done the neuroscience of psychedelics for about 8 years. And I knew it was something that I was always really interested in. But ayahuasca is a psychedelic medicina that's a vine and a leaf. And basically it sends you on a journey with Mother Ayahuasca. So she is a very loving but can sometimes be a bit of a brutal mother, in that she will show you every single thing that you need to see. So I was listening to that podcast and I walked out and I said to my husband, I'm coming with you to Costa Rica. He will still do his Spanish. And I literally booked it the next day. And so in November 2022, I went to Costa Rica, went to Rhythmia Life Advancement Centre and did the 8-day program there, which is 4 ayahuasca ceremonies. It's the only medically registered ayahuasca retreat in the world. Mm-hmm. And it's got beautiful people like Cesar Millan, Kelly Slater, Graham Hancock, all these incredible people on the board who have gone and done these journeys at this particular facility and had incredible eye-opening experiences. So for me, it was such a painful journey. And I'm not talking just emotionally, physically. She was doing surgery on my knees. She was doing a whole heap of incredible things. I went back into the birthing canal. I was rebirthed in terms of, I can start again. Mm-hmm. I don't have to hold the tale of old I am cheesy. I've had cancer and I'm a mum and I, work and, I didn't become that story anymore. That wasn't me, and I could let that tale go, because you can kind of have a bit of pride as well. I grew up in a cult. It can feel like something you're quite proud of. And I realized that then when I was retelling that story of, I grew up in a cult, there's no emotion attached to it anymore. It just happened.
Yep. And
it's brought me to where I am. It probably gave me the strength to get through the cancer, because you had to have grit to grow up in a cult. I think it was all of those things were meant to happen to get me to the point where Rhythmia was that next step for me to release everything emotionally and then go on from there. There's always more. There's always more work that people can do. But in researching the neuroscience of psychedelics, I think I really understood in my head everything incredible that can happen with it. But then, going and actually doing it was pretty phenomenal.
Incredible. Thank you for sharing.
No worries.
We've sort of moved into the why of your neuroscience sort of journey. You'd already kicked that off pre-cancer. And from the sounds of it, that was really strengthened once you found out about that cancer, and does that sort of deepen your journey into your neuroscience? Mm-hmm. What are some examples, experiences, opportunities that have come your way from being in the neuroscience field in your studies?
Yeah, well, when the earthquakes happened in Christchurch, it was something where I'd been living in New Zealand for 4 years just before the earthquake. So I'd been to, New Zealand Police Force and a lot of the mines around the area just to do drug and alcohol and fatigue management training on the workforce. And I think it was so having studied sort of neuroscience for a little while there, what I did, it was psychologists typically who went and ran the programs, but then I started up the same business in New Zealand that they had here in Australia. And I added a significant amount of neuroscience into the actual training around fatigue management. So when the Christchurch earthquakes happened, Kiwi Rail actually called me. So I'd been living in Brisbane since 2011, so just, similar time frame. And they had me come back every fortnight to work with their train drivers on how to actually cope, how to cope with the PTSD that was caused post-earthquake. There had been a number of suicides that had happened after it. And crazily, I only worked this out this year. But the sound of a train is the same as the sound of an earthquake coming. So I didn't work out all that time back then when I was working with them why they kept being triggered. So I was working with them on their brain, what was happening in their brain from a PTSD perspective. And yeah, it just didn't trigger till this year, but it still significantly improved them. Just to be able to actually know what was happening in their brain, why they were getting triggered, and what they could do about it. So I've worked with a lot of executives as well, just in companies, in terms of how to get the best out of your team with the brain in mind. So it's very sort of neuro leadership focused in terms of how they can improve their workforce, knowing about the brain.
That's excellent. Well, that leads us pretty well into the real reason we're here. So what we would like to do is, with your expertise, maybe go into the brain a little bit and try and understand the parts of the brain, and then go into what happens in the brain for us physiologically when we start to feel the effects of various mental disorders. So maybe if you could just first give us a firefighter's understanding of the brain.
Absolutely.
That's a simple understanding.
Yeah.
Please.
Lucky I worked with men of the minds. Look, it is such a complex beast, the brain, and something that we still do not know so much about. That's the exciting part, right? Because looking at physiology, pure physiology of the body, musculoskeletal system, we pretty well know most of it. But the exciting thing about the brain is we're still continuing to learn every single day. So we have basically a nice cushion inside our skull, and that cushion basically controls the majority of our body's activities, whether it's the ones that are that we're thinking about or the ones that we're not thinking about. So our ability to breathe, our ability to swallow, move, have nerve responses, all of that type of thing is picked up in the brain. So it's like a massive computer sitting on the top of our shoulders. Now, we do not use our brain to its full capacity. Einstein did say once, if we actually used our brain to its full capacity, we would not need anything.
Wow.
Yeah. I still can't really work out what that means, but he was pretty phenomenal. So it's that the functional MRI machines that have come in probably in the past 30 years, and they're getting better and better in terms of their movement, what they actually show is how the brain responds with different stimuli. So what we look at is the amygdala, for example, which is the area of the brain that deals with your fight-flight response. So something for the fire service that we probably find some pretty fired-off amygdalas within this, workforce. So there's the amygdala, which is the fight-flight response. We've got something that sits on the outside of the brain, and it's actually, so on the neocortex is our imprint. So our imprint is what all the experiences in our life have brought us to a point where we have, it's like our fingerprint, in that nobody will have the same imprint. Even if your brother and sister and yourselves all were brought up the same, all of your imprints will be different. Basically that sits on the outside and adjusts how we respond to any situation.
Right, so that's your experiences as you were growing up.
Yes.
So did you say the neocortex outside of the brain has all of your sort of perceptions and experiences of everything that's happened through your life, and that is basically a filter that everything runs through?
Correct. It's like your rose-coloured glasses.
Yeah, gotcha.
Or your beer goggles.
Yeah. Gotcha.
Yeah. So that sits on the outside, and then we've got all of these filing cabinets in our brain. So the filing cabinets are where usually an experience goes through to the amygdala, it then shoots to the hippocampus, and the hippocampus goes, oh, where do I need to send this in the brain? Does it need to go in the smells section, or the physical experiences section, or the emotional experiences section? So all of those filing cabinets that we can then file memories in, or we can retrieve them at different times. So sometimes a smell will trigger a memory. So you basically open that filing cabinet, the memory has come through the insula. So the insula is a section of, it's called your emotion highway. So through that memory release, it then goes to our executive function, which is the prefrontal cortex, the bit that sits at the front of our brain. And it is what makes us make sense of what we're either experiencing or what we're drawing out of our memory. So when we have different mental health conditions, some of those processes don't work, which we'll go into a little bit later. But yeah, basically the memories get released, we think about them, we can logically explain them, and that's a sort of overview of what happens in the brain. Right. But so much more.
So just on that, Cheesy, with that explanation, having done a little bit of research on situational awareness, they talk a lot about the accessing those filing cabinets. And now you can confirm or deny, but is there current studies on perhaps there's a second brain in the stomach somewhere that, we've always gone on gut feeling or intuition, but they're saying that there possibly could be a connection with a second brain. Have you heard of that? Is that something that's spoken about in your field?
I can absolutely confirm that. Yeah, look,
wow.
In terms of the gut and the gut's messages to the brain, as well as the heart and the heart's messages to the brain, we actually didn't realize historically how many messages go from the heart to the brain. We thought it was just a one-way street from the brain telling the heart to pump. So as with gut health and, trusting your gut, having a gut intuition, there is a significant amount of receptors within the gut that actually do send messages. It actually heads back up through the spinal cord into the brain, same as the heart. So the heart actually sends more messages to the brain than the brain does to the heart. So when people say, for example, I died of a broken heart, that's actually from the significant amount of messages that are going from the heart to the brain, and then the brain therefore back to the heart. Yes, confirm that with the gut as well. There's a significant amount of messages that go from the gut to the brain.
So I guess that in itself could be, there could be positives and negatives. And I mean, obviously the positives are for first responders going to an incident where they can draw on that filing cabinet from a previous incident to say, and this all happens in such a short time, that worked really well. I'm not going to, I'll potentially do that again, or that didn't work so well, so I'm not going to do that. Now, I guess the downside is when we talked about, you mentioned early triggers, I'm guessing that could potentially be a problem and linked in with that PTSD. For example, certain smells or certain noises you mentioned with the trains, those things, I guess, being accessed into that filing cabinet could be somewhat detrimental.
Correct. So the PTSD brain actually can't open filing cabinets. So that's a very simplistic way of saying, the amygdala is switched on consistently with a PTSD brain. And so therefore, if somebody who's suffering from an episode of PTSD goes into that fire response, they actually can't draw on history because they're sitting in fight, flight, or freeze.
Yep.
So the filing cabinets are exceptionally good for, when you're not in a state of PTSD, but when you are, you're going to be on autopilot as opposed to, drawing on what worked well, what didn't work well. You'll be watching other people around you. So a significant episode of PTSD is not something somebody will perform very well in an emergency response because they're literally in their primitive brain.
Right.
So,
very interesting.
So that sort of brings us to where, if we move down the track now to PTSD and what happens within the brain. Mm-hmm. So you're saying during someone who's experiencing PTSD, their amygdala is just firing nonstop. Mm-hmm. So is there something that causes that to occur? And is there anything else going on in the brain at the same time?
So much going on in the brain.
Oh, yeah. I'm sure there is. In fireman speak.
Yeah, absolutely. So basically when somebody is in an acute episode of PTSD, so you can have underlying chronic PTSD, or then you can have an acute episode. So an acute episode is somebody who walks into a typical fire response like you would normally enter, and they literally don't know what to do because they can't draw on any of that past experience. Sometimes they'll go into freeze, where they're just literally standing there and there's not much going on. Some will rush right in because they're in that sort of fight response, and some just will have to walk away because they don't know. So that's the fight, flight, freeze of, your amygdala responses. So when the amygdala is firing off, it basically will control the entire brain, and it will only allow you to have primitive responses to all of the actions. So you're not using your executive function. So this prefrontal cortex, the highest level thinking part of our brain, it's the part of our brain that makes us the highest level animal. So other animals, other species do not have the prefrontal cortex, which is why they can't logically work through things like we can. When the amygdala's firing, prefrontal does not work very well. So typically we can only hold 7 actors on the stage, which means 7 items within that prefrontal cortex to work through. So some people who have that sort of decision fatigue have too many actors on the stage, too many things in prefrontal, and so therefore they cannot make a decision. So there's sometimes that, is it too many actors on the stage, or are they in PTSD acute episode? Because they can look quite similar. So sometimes if they're sort of unable to make decisions, it's a matter of going, okay, let's just sit down and work out what those decisions are. You can be able to determine whether it's PTSD or just, decision impotence, like they just can't get there. But yeah.
So then what about, so that's acute PTSD. What about, you mentioned there's chronic PTSD as well? Similar sort of thing, or?
It's similar in that the hippocampus can't grab those memories. So it'll be able to grab some lower level memories. So, if you're having fun with your kids, or those more joyful memories, if you've got sort of a low level chronic PTSD, it'll be able to grab some of those good memories. But the people who you speak to and they go, I literally do not remember that, and it happened yesterday or 3 days ago, are typically in that more acute phase of PTSD where their hippocampus isn't able to file anything.
Yep. And is this something that gradually occurs? So your amygdala sort of becomes more and more active over time, and something that we can be aware of that it's becoming an issue? Or is it just a one day it's there, one day it's not sort of thing?
No, it can be that over a period of time you're looking for memories and you're not able to find them, but you're not feeling terrible. You're not feeling like your body's being flooded with adrenaline, noradrenaline, cortisol, all those types of... So in PTSD, it's going to flood your system with hormones. So your adrenal glands go into overload, you increase your blood sugar levels. So there's a lot of physiological things that happen when the amygdala's flicked. If you're finding that you're not in that state of sort of heightened energy or heightened anxiety, I don't want to use that word anxiety there, but it's that sort of high stress level, then that's sort of that more sort of, I'm getting there to the amygdala being consistently flicked on, and so therefore that's an acute episode of PTSD. So it can be there, and then it can flick on significantly.
But the amygdala obviously plays an important role in our functioning in day-to-day life as normal.
Yes.
So it's a really important part of our brain and our operating system. When do we get to a point when we go, I think it's functioning too much now? Are there any sort of signs and symptoms? You've mentioned a couple of things there, but is there anything that we should be acutely aware of that we go, oh, actually, I'm noticing that maybe I'm in that fight-flight response too much?
When you're going to do your typical jobs and you don't remember doing them. So I'm talking about walking around the shopping centre, doing your shopping on a Saturday morning, and you enter and then you're putting your food up on the conveyor and you don't remember doing your shop. Those are the types of things where you have those gaps. It's not the same as from this fire station, you driving home and you don't remember that drive. That's okay, because your brain will actually do that without you having to be fully consciously aware of it, because it is a pattern.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're forgetting other things that are quite a significantly long period of time, like your typical shopping, or you've gone down to the park with the kids and then you get back and then, you know, somebody says, oh, I saw you at the park, and you're like, what? You know, if you're starting to lose a lot of that memory function, that's a really good sign that something significant needs to happen.
Sorry, just to wind back a little bit, these acute episodes, or even these chronic ones, are they always going to be in relation to being confronted with a huge stressor? So, you know, like for us, we're going to these critical incidents, potentially traumatic one. Is there any link there? Like, do we have to be going to a particularly, like a certain level of incident that's just going to cause us to have these acute reactions? Or
no, sadly, because then we'd be able to explain it more. So it's like when I would work on people's bodies and they would say, you know, I do this really physical role. I'm an underground driller at a mine and it's incredibly physical, but I prolapse the disc in my back, bending over to pick up a pen from the desk. So it's often a little trigger because you've got these big things that you're aware of and you know it's significant, and you know it when you respond to any emergency, there's almost you're engaged for it. So it's then the little thing. It's the kid who may be your own child who's just screaming at home and is inconsolable, or, you know, they're playing with the ball and the ball, you know, hits you on the head. That can be a trigger. So it's not necessarily, or you could be sitting there having a wonderful time with your spouse and that can be a trigger. So there's no actual storybook sort of this is when it's going to happen. Same as with the human body. You know, we can often prolapse a disc just from picking up a pen.
And is that those triggers, are they existent because we haven't processed something that we've seen or done at those incidents? Like
yes.
you said, we're primed for that. You know, something's hit us in the head and we haven't thought anything of it, and then that becomes the trigger. Is that because we haven't made those connections in our brain?
Yeah, so when we have any incident response, it stores because it's energy. So the beauty of what people used to typically call Cheesy's woo-woo shit is now scientifically proven. So the fabulous thing about functional MRI screens is that we can now see what we used to say, you know, energy. Oh, it's just all energy. Well, guess what? We can see energy. So when you visit a situation that's incredibly emotional or difficult and you're responding to something quite significant, the energy from that is in your body. And if you don't manage to express that energy either physically, verbally, however that works for you, with music, get the energy out of your body, it'll store in your body. And so that built over time is basically going to be, it's too much, I'm too heavy. I'm too heavy with all this energy that I'm holding on to. And so therefore it has to come out some way, and that is how it shuts down the brain.
And that really relates to the last episode we did with Mandy, who was talking about the ways that we need to complete the stress cycle. And she mentioned 6 different things we need to do to complete the stress cycle, and then test it.
What were those 6 things?
Yeah, I'll just
Go back on your notes.
No, but there was laughter was one.
Laughter, creativity, connection, like physical connection. Jando will know the rest of them.
Well, there was tactical tears, Tim. You forgot the tactical
tears. That's right. Yes.
Getting it out. Getting everything out.
Yeah.
So it's exactly what you're saying there, Cheesy, about encountering a stressful situation and then having some way to release that energy.
Yep.
That's definitely something that I think we need to be better at, and something we need to be more aware of for sure.
Because the importance of cortisol release in the body. So the body has to release a certain amount of cortisol, that's our stress hormone, across a day. So everyone has to release it. So I know we're not sort of going into tips yet, but if you front end load the day with cortisol release, that means that we still have the, you know, an amount to release across the rest of the day. But if you're going to an incident and you've front end loaded your day with cortisol release, there's less to be released across that incident. And that's just stressing your body out in the morning. You know, looking at the sun, not the bright sun, but the sun coming off the horizon, getting into cold water. There's actually nothing more beneficial for the body than getting into cold water, because you produce a huge amount of cortisol. It's incredibly stressful. So those sorts of things do help you deal with that stress across the rest of the day, because you've front-loaded your day with stress.
Okay, so stressing yourself at the start of the day.
Correct.
Good idea.
Controlled stress.
Okay.
Yep.
Gotcha.
Okay, so question, Cheesy. Just hearing those, sort of things that you were talking about previously with, dumping cortisol in the morning or having that, stress release in the morning to try and alleviate that through the day. That's all great advice. And I think we've always been very reactive as first responders, and hearing this now, it sort of opens up another whole world of, how we can start providing some information on potential solutions to, well, not solutions as such, but something to help us try and avoid that chronic PTSD or complex PTSD. The one question I have, and, having, we're all involved in this job and have come across certain people with these conditions. I think the main thing I want to know is there a lead up to this? Is that person just wake up one day and all of a sudden the whole world sort of implodes on them, or is it just different? Because we've all seen, our own people on ship, and all of a sudden we hear about someone that may be going through PTSD. Then we'll all of a sudden say, you know what? Thinking about it now, I could see that happening, but at the time, yet we don't see anything, or we certainly don't react on anything. Is there any sort of things that we need to watch out for, I guess, or warning signs before we get to that stage of not being able to get out of bed?
Yeah, absolutely. So when those things are starting to happen in the brain, the body will respond. So what you'll find is increased heart rate, increased blood pressure, increased blood sugar levels. So those are the things where the body, when we have a situation that is an emergency, the body will respond in such a way where the adrenal glands go, all right, we're on, it's our turn, let's get some adrenaline, let's get some noradrenaline, let's pump sugar into the body so that we can actually start to respond to this, because the pancreas has to go, yes, we need to have this sugar released so that we can utilize it for energy. So anyone who's not working through those hormones that are being dumped into the body will basically start physically showing the signs. So for women, for example, they'll start to get that weight through their midsection. Men tend to get the visceral fat as a result of it. So you can't tend to see that as well as you can when women start distributing the weight through the buttocks and the hips. So there's definitely physical signs of that happening. What you'll also, the thing that it requires though is being in touch with your body. So a lot of people who are going through really difficult situations will actually shut off the body. So it's a matter of going, okay, what's my routine for how I'm going to know what's happening in my body? Do I need to get a blood pressure monitor, or do I just need to make sure I have 6 monthly doctor check-ins, have my bloods done every 6 months, have my, my glucose and my cholesterol done, because those are the sorts of things that will start to creep up if we're not dealing with what is happening in our brain.
And then from a neurological perspective, if we find ourselves in a situation where all of this stuff is starting to happen, we're starting to forget things, we feel like we're in that fight flight, our blood pressure's up, and maybe we go and get diagnosed with PTSD, who knows. But from a neurological perspective, what sort of things can we do to slow down our amygdala and start getting our brain functioning back in a normal way again?
Yep. The best first thing is grounding and nature. So if you consider that we're energy, right? Our cells are just vibrating next to each other, and we need to work out how to actually draw that out of ourselves. Is literally just taking your shoes off and going and standing in the grass or standing on the beach, those sorts of things. Music is another one that's incredibly powerful for the brain. There's some people who lean into music and some don't. So it's not that I'm saying You know, music's good for 100% of people. You need to work out what works for you. But music's incredibly powerful for actually quietening down the brain. And that's sometimes actually what we need, is for the brain to be a bit quiet. And like even on the weekend, I stood, my husband was surfing, I stood with my feet on the sand. I had the loudest music ever going on in my headset, and it was just so releasing. And you can actually feel the stress coming out of your body by connecting to the earth, because we know that actually draws negative ions out of the body anyway. So again, that's science, which is beautiful. Those sorts of things can help really bring you down. If you're finding that you're listening to music that really engages you, or you are earthing yourself and you're still heightened, you need to go to the GP and probably have some bloods done and have your blood pressure checked, and you're probably in more of a heightened state. But those two things are very significant for the body.
Great. And what about in terms of supporting our brain health, supplementation or different diets or anything that are going to help us with our brain?
Yeah, so again, talking about that brain-gut connection, what we put in our gut has a significant impact, not just on our body, but on our brain. So when we're having things like, if we're feeling a bit sluggish and we have some caffeine, for example, it speeds up the information processing in the brain. It's beautiful, unless overused. So it's like anything, isn't it? When you have too much of it, it becomes a negative. But having those good fats in your diet is very, very important for your brain. So that's your almonds, that's your seafood, that's avocado, just foods like that are really dense in that really good fat is important for the body's ability to send the messages in the brain. It has to have those good fats. So it has a big impact.
Excellent. So we might move on from PTSD, unless there's anything else relevant you can think of around that topic that we haven't touched on.
The only, maybe a bit controversial but still relevant where it comes to PTSD, depression, anxiety, stress disorders, is that they are overdiagnosed. Same with ADHD, same with, a lot of those mental health conditions is we're becoming conditioned to not deal with our emotions. And so therefore, GPs like to refer lots of medications for these types of things. So what I would say is try everything before your medications. But PTSD is another one that is somewhat overdiagnosed.
I've got one more before you move on. And so she's in our job, and certainly my previous occupation in the military, those PTSD, I guess the conception around that is it's a figurative death sentence for your career. Once you get diagnosed with that, you're generally out of a job. We can't have you here. So my question is, can we have a PTSD diagnosis or have PTSD, implement, treat, move through it, and still be a functioning member of our workplace, of society? Is it once you've had it, that's it, you've got it forever and you're done? Or can we sort of bounce back from that?
100% we can bounce back. It's the beauty of the new wave of research, or I shouldn't say new wave, it's an old wave that's coming back, is psychedelics. So on the 1st of July last year in Australia, psychedelics being MDMA and psilocybin were descheduled. So they've gone from prohibited substances to actually referable substances. So the amount of research that's being done all across the world for drug-resistant depression, PTSD, is significant in this space. It's a very exciting space, which is, I guess, why I was looking at the neuroscience of psychedelics all that time ago. In the 50s, it was huge, and then it just got, eliminated from our ability to treat people with these types of things. So significant amount of research not only happening in Australia but all over the world, and Mind Medicine Australia now have practitioners who are able to do psychedelic psychotherapy in order to assist people through that. So other than, I guess, the psychedelics, it is difficult to have other treatments that are as effective as that. And we've seen the benefit of that with all the research that's been done.
From a neuroscience perspective, why is that?
So basically we talked about the amygdala a lot and the fact that it's always turned on with somebody suffering chronic PTSD. What the psychedelics actually do is they flick the switch. So for that period of time, the brain goes, oh, this is how it can be. This is actually a more relaxed state for my brain to be in. And what has triggered the PTSD can be logically thought through. So often we'll have, experiences in our life that have contributed to the PTSD that we can't actually think through because our executive function has turned off in our brain. So switching the amygdala off and this executive function going, hey, let's work through what this trauma is, that actually then lets you drop that, I guess, what you've attached to that trauma, and that's the energy. So if you've attached, a lot of negative emotions to a certain event, what the psychedelics actually do is they allow you to drop the emotions, logically think it through, and then move on. And so the amygdala doesn't need to be on all the time.
Can that be achieved without psychedelics? Can we, I guess, is it cognitively reframing and then rewiring those processes in the brain? Can we do that, I guess, without those assistances?
Yeah, so that's the whole CBT, so the cognitive behavioural therapy. So that works through, how you can rewire the brain. So neuroplasticity is how we do it. So we do know, so the old adage, you can't teach an old dog new tricks, is 100% wrong. We can learn until the day we die. That's how plastic our brain is. And that is what wasn't understood all of that time ago when we were like, no, that, at 30, you'll know everything you'll ever need to know or are able to learn. Completely false. So the beauty of neuroplasticity is it happens when we sleep. So if people are poorly sleeping or don't sleep at all, then they're not going to be able to rewire their brain. But anyone who has really good CBT just before bed, they talk through, this is what I want to achieve. This is the life I want to live. Really being conscious of that takes work, right? It's not just something where we're like, oh, okay, I'm going to feel better. And then, it actually takes work to actually rewire the brain. But then when we go to sleep, the neuroplasticity wave starts and we can actually rewire. So it does take, so CBT absolutely does work. Music works. If you go back to music from childhood, it can actually calm your brain to a point where memories may come up. And they're quite significant as well. So you definitely need somebody to work through that with you.
Awesome. One more question on that. The longer we leave it and have those, I'm going to pull me up if I'm wrong, say maladaptive processes in our brain, is it harder to rewire them? I.e., if we notice something and jump on it earlier, is it going to be beneficial for us to get back to a state of normal, so to speak?
Without the psychedelics, the longer it's been, the more difficult it is. So what we've got in our brain is train tracks. And those train tracks are our ways of thinking, our self-talk, when I go to this place, this particular things happen, I'm an idiot. Like all of that stuff is wired into our brain. So if you make that track solid, it's hard to actually shift off that track. So the difference with the psychedelics is it actually explodes the tracks and you decide where you want the wires to go. So yes, it can happen. The longer it's been, the more difficult it is without the psychedelics.
Awesome.
You touched on sleep there before, and this was something I was going to go to later on in our chat, but seeing as we've touched on it, we'll go there. You're talking about neuroplasticity with sleep. Something that I heard recently, and I'd like to get your perspective on it, is being involved in a traumatic event and then going to sleep soon after that, which is a very common thing for us in the fire service. We might go to a traumatic incident and then half an hour to an hour later, we might be in bed asleep at night. Don't spread it around that we sleep, but anyway. So from your perspective, what would be happening in the brain, and is that beneficial or not beneficial for us to be operating in that way?
So there's two types of people, right? So there's people who will go to an incident And when they walk away from the incident, it's done. It's just, I'm done. And they don't drag it with them. People who ruminate on the incident and then go to sleep, they're going to be creating trauma lines within their brain. And it's more likely that their amygdala will just be that I need to be on all the time to be able to respond. So the people who sort of find that they're ruminating on any incident would be better to move their body once they get back to the station. So that could just be 20 squats, 20 push-ups, like actually just move the rest of the energy out of the body that's being produced by the adrenal glands, by the pancreas, by all the areas of the body that assist you to be able to respond. When you're feeling absolutely physically exhausted, then go to sleep. Right. But whilst you're doing those activities, you need to consciously think about something else. So whether it's that you put music on and it's, you know, whatever music works for people, whether it's sort of uplifting music or Viking music or whatever works for you, then that will help your brain release those. I guess it's not going to release all the memories, but you won't actually be holding on to that emotion, holding on to that energy when you're going to sleep. So you need to move your body when you get home.
What about stressing your body in other ways after a traumatic event? So I was just came to me about ice baths. Would that be beneficial? The
only issue with ice baths just before you go to bed is that a sleep wave is triggered by your core body temperature dropping. So you're better off doing some exercise and having a hot shower. Right. So if you're wanting to get a sleep wave, if you've missed the sleep wave, which tends to happen as the sun goes down, because we're still cavemen and women, when the sun goes down, the serotonin converts to your sleep hormone melatonin and triggers a sleep wave. If we miss that sleep wave, we can recreate it by having a warm shower, core body temperature drops, and you'll get another sleep wave. So if you're coming back after an incident and doing a cold plunge, then have a hot shower.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Do we move on to different types of things, depression, anxiety and all that?
Absolutely.
Anything else we've missed?
No.
Okay.
So there's a big difference between feeling depressed and anxious and clinical depression, clinical anxiety. So they're quite different things that happen in the brain. So depression, like if we think of the whole brain being a whole bunch of highways, and that's all the synapses all connecting, neurons connecting, what can happen with depression is that some of those highways stop working. There could be like an accident. Let's say there's an accident on that highway and the messages aren't getting through. And so it's the depressing of the information processing of the brain. Anxiety, on the flip side, speeds everything up to a point where your brain goes, I'm sorry, I can't do this. And it can also shut down. So anxiety that leads to panic attacks is basically your adrenal glands going, I am on and I am flooding. So think of a fire hose and the fact that you're flooding the body with adrenaline and noradrenaline to the point where the heart rate increases so significantly, you feel like you're going to have a heart attack. And then, you know, often people with huge anxiety and panic attacks will pass out because the brain's just going, stop. You need to stop. And that's how the brain stops. This is actually by passing out. Depression, you can have your, clinical depression is the inability for the brain to produce serotonin often. So that's our happy hormone. That's the thing that we need in order to feel good about things. So clinical depression is really the body's not producing that and they literally cannot feel good about anything and they just want to curl up in a ball and go back to the fetal position. You notice a lot of people with depression will curl up and actually want to go back into the womb. So that's, again, the body's protective mechanism to say, we need to slow down, we need to think about it. So people who are not clinically depressed but depressed is, again, a slowing down of information processing in the brain, but it's backward rumination. So if we are concentrating and dwelling on our past, it slows down all that information processing in the brain. Anxiety can just be looking forward, fearing the future, fearing what's going to happen. Like if I was, driving here on the way and worried about coming and sitting in here, you can't speak properly because it's just that fear of what if, what may be. And this should have, looking backwards for depression. So in the present moment, if we're fully present, anxiety and depression that aren't the clinical form cannot exist. So if we sit in gratitude in the now, I know that sounds a bit woo-woo again, but if we sit here and appreciate what we have, our children, our jobs, the fact that we're sitting here in a really comfortable room with really good gear to to record a podcast on, then we can't feel anxious and we can't feel depressed. So again, I'm not saying depression and anxiety from a clinical perspective can be alleviated with gratitude, but depression and anxiety that aren't clinically diagnosed, yes, absolutely can be alleviated with that.
So are there some things within us physiologically that would make us more prone to either of those, depression and anxiety? Is it an overactive, adrenal glands overactive, or something like that would make someone more susceptible?
Typically our first 7 years.
Mm-hmm.
So our first 7 years are what create the most significant imprint on the neocortex. So what we've had to cope with throughout our life. So for some people, if they've had a significant trauma as a young'un, what that does, so again, is it nature or nurture? But what it can do, trauma for some people, is it can give them grit, it can give them resilience, it can increase, this is a funny word, but it can increase their anterior mid-cingulate cortex. So that's an area of the brain that sits just behind our executive function. And on people typically who have had really cruisy lives, really wonderful upbringings, happiness and rainbows and unicorns have a very thin anterior mid-cingulate cortex, which means they don't typically, I'm going to say typical again, they don't have the grit and resilience of people who have had more difficult upbringings. So I'm not saying if you had a difficult upbringing, you're less likely to have depression and anxiety, but that anterior mid-cingulate cortex is definitely thicker in people who have had those more difficult first 7 years of their life. So the imprint is how we will respond to situations. And if we can't be present, if we're somebody that's always looking back and always looking forward, there's absolutely more prevalence for depression and anxiety. But again, is that nature or nurture? Is that because our parents taught us that, or is that because that's how we're born? That still hasn't been proven.
Can you see that by looking at someone's brain?
You can see the anterior mid-cingulate cortex, yeah.
Okay, so you could have a look at that and see how thick it is and say, or you
had a tough one.
Yeah, right.
And you've got grit, you've got resilience, you've got the ability. So that was only found in the last 2 years.
Wow.
So there's all these areas of the brain that we will keep figuring out.
Wow, incredible.
My brain goes to a spot, might be a little bit left of field here, but as a parent, you're speaking about those first 7 years. Mm-hmm. No parent wants to put their child through, traumatic or really difficult situation. We all want to wrap them up in cotton wool, right? But is there anything that we can do? And, is it promoting that, being present and being grateful and in building those practices in us? Is there anything outside of that we can do to build that? I'm not going to try and attempt that word.
No. The AMC. Yeah. Absolutely. So we have recognised with parenting and parents wanting to wrap their kids up in cotton wool, there's these paper-thin AMCs. So I have 2 boys and I wanted them to be boys. And I'd be down at the park with them, even though I was incredibly sick, bald, vomiting across the side, and I would go, get up in that tree and work it out. That develops not only prefrontal cortex, but now we also know the AMC. So I wasn't that mum who said, don't climb trees, it's too dangerous, because I knew how important it was for the brain for them to try and fail. Team sports. Team sports is the other things that our kids can do where they will lose, they'll get hurt, they won't like their teammates. All of these experiences that we can provide for our children, they learn so much more when they lose than when they win. So whenever my kids would lose, I was not displeased. I'm so competitive. So I didn't like that part of it. But on the flip side, I was so happy for their brains, for what they would be learning in that team sport. It was very different to singular sport. So I was a gymnast for 14 years and that was just me. So I didn't have to have that thing where I was relying on somebody else or, we were having, I think the team sport dynamic is incredibly important for children because that will help develop that.
So when you're talking about challenges and the AMC,
yes,
you're talking. It doesn't necessarily have to be a big trauma event. It could just be that if a child is had to work out challenges along their life as well. So
disappointments, and pushing through.
Yeah, okay.
Because I know for my husband, who is a teacher, that one of the most difficult things for him is parents. Because they're so protective of their children. And if I get an email home, which I do sometimes for my younger boy, about his behaviour and how he is, I will 100% of the time defend the teacher. Because I know my child. I know he's not stopping and talking in class. And he can be a bit mouthy. So
sounds like a good kid.
Yeah. 100% of the time I will always support the teacher because, again, imagine putting up with all of our kids. Far out. Huge job. Yeah. So, it's difficult when parents consistently go in to defend their children because that teaches their children nothing. So even with the refs on the field, they're frustrating. But I will always, if my child ever complains about the ref, I will say it's not them, whether I thought it was them or not. But it's better for his brain to cope with that, to deal with that, to process that, rather than me consistently defending my child. It's really important they learn those lessons because it's much better for their brain.
Okay. My boy will be really happy to hear that when I get home. Okay, can we move on to addiction? Mm-hmm. So can we talk about the brain and addiction and what happens there?
Absolutely. So there's still an interesting train of thought around addiction. Are you born an addict or do you grow into an addict? So it's not typically or necessarily a trauma response that creates an addict, but it is a constant dopamine hit for the brain. So if you think about alcohol addiction or drug addiction, what it's doing is muting a brain response. So there's probably a couple of different ways you can move down an addiction path. And if it's somebody with depression and anxiety, they will use a substance to quieten the mind. Now, the problem is what it actually does with the amygdala, different to the other medicines I guess we were talking about before, is it doesn't flip off the amygdala to go, okay, I can have a state of peace. It squashes it. So what that means is you've then got a backup of all those emotions waiting to fire off as soon as the alcohol or the drugs wear off. And then you get flooded with it, which is why people will drink to feel better, but then they go, and then I feel worse. It's because you've been flooded with what was backed up. So, the way to, I guess, process addiction is to go, what am I trying to avoid if that's the cause of the addiction? And, what new pathways do I need to create? So alcohol addiction is so significant in the whole world, except for places that don't have alcohol. Muslim countries, it's not a problem. So alcohol, I guess, especially in Australia, is seen as Australian. It's just something Aussies do. And what we can see in functional fMRI scans, we've had people take everything under those. We've had them take LSD, magic mushrooms, MDMA, alcohol, weed. So we basically provide them with all of these types of things under a studied environment and had a look at what happens in the brain. So there's some medicines that are adaptive for the brain and some that are maladaptive. And alcohol literally destroys brain tissue. It is very maladaptive for the brain. There's no physical or mental benefit to alcohol other than for the people who are drinking that moment in time when they stop worrying about their woes. But it's just squashed down and so therefore releases significantly after. So we do know that addiction and alcoholics, for example, are more prevalent with A positive blood types. Very interesting finding that they sort of came up with, but those who were able to be part of the study and who volunteered to be part of the study with hundreds and thousands of alcoholics, APOS was the highest prevalence of that. So again, nature or nurture, are they born with it? Which we still haven't been able to disprove.
Right. So if we're talking about alcohol specifically, what you're saying that I'm gathering is you drink alcohol, it suppresses that bad feeling and shuts off part of the brain while we're under the influence. Is that right?
Yeah, so the amygdala won't fire. You won't get, except for some people where it becomes too much when they're drunk and they have that violent outburst. Yep. So that's when the amygdala's gone, I can't hold this anymore, and you actually fire off and have an incredibly violent response to drinking alcohol. But it kind of mutes, it just puts a bit of a lid, doesn't flick off the switch. So the amygdala's still going, but it's put a bit of a lid on it until what's that thing where the...
Fireworks?
Yeah.
Fireworks?
You know, I'm thinking that can where that thing just pops out of it.
Oh, yeah, the like slinky thing that pops out of it.
Yes, that's
I'm
what
sure there's a name for it.
That is what the amygdala does with alcohol.
Right. So no positive benefit from alcohol other than it feels good at the time when you're drinking it and your mates think you're cool.
Correct.
Yeah.
Sorry, everybody. And it's amazing how, like, I almost said I was 37, as a 47-year-old woman, you just feel so much better not drinking. Like, I stopped 9 years ago, not for any reason, but that I just wanted to feel better. And it was just coming off the back of having cancer. I think it was like that, what do I need to do that's good for my brain and take away what's bad for my brain? So you just feel an awful lot better.
And then what about the link between that and leading towards things like depression, anxiety, PTSD, any other stress disorders? Is there a link?
Oh, absolutely. Because of the fact that you have just squashed that amygdala. So then when you're flooded after that, that is a huge amount of activity that goes on within the brain that can send you into a highly anxious state, because how's your body meant to deal with everything that's just Jack in a can? No, whatever it's called. I really want to know the name of that now.
Jack in a box.
That'll do.
Is that it?
Yeah, it's like that little wind-up thing. When that explodes after the muting of the brain, because alcohol is a depressant, so it slows down information processing of the brain. When that information processing stops being slowed down and you get flooded with everything that's been trapped, then you can have absolutely have an anxiety attack or a PTSD episode.
Right. Thank you. Sorry, everyone. Don't drink.
Drink water.
So moving on from that topic, Cheesy, if we just want to touch on our lifestyles as firefighters, something that has occurred to me, and I think all of us at some stage, is how detrimental shift work can be to both to our sleep cycle, to our mental health, to our physical health, and then following on from that, what that does to our habits and patterns in life. You know, we'll find ourselves, if fireys are quite high coffee consumers, and you know, you might be coming to a night shift and drinking a coffee to keep you awake for a little bit, and then therefore not sleeping as well at night, and then therefore eating at different times during the day, and so on and so forth. So just would like to get an understanding of what those sort of patterns are doing to us on a neurological level.
Absolutely. So it's amazing. Having worked with shift workers for 25 years, like more so in mining, so they do weeker days, weeker nights, then a week home. It is incredible. Making small changes can have a significant impact. So if we speak about coffee, coffee's a beautiful tool, but it is a stimulant. So it will reduce the quality of your sleep. You will not get into stage 4 sleep if you've had a coffee within 4 hours of trying to sleep. Now, I'm actually somebody who can have a coffee and then go and have a nap. So it's not that I can't fall asleep after having a coffee, but my stage 4, which is my deep sleep, will not occur if I've had that. So we've got stimulants and depressants, and things do different things for our body and for our brain. So our stimulants being coffee, cigarettes, all the bad drugs, your methamphetamines, your, anything that sort of stimulates the brain, we will lose stage 4 sleep, and we will also shoot out the top of REM sleep. So our sleep goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 3, 2, 1 REM. And REM is our rapid eye movement sleep where we dream. That's the area of the brain where we're sort of dreaming, processing, brain healing. So stage 4 is body healing. REM sleep is brain healing. So if we're having sort of stimulants before we're going to bed or when we're doing night shift, we do not get 4. We very often don't get REM. So we're not getting physical recovery. So when you're trying to sleep during the day after a night shift, you're not going to get stage 4, and you'll often again pop out the top of REM sleep. So we should typically across the night do sort of 1, 2, 3, 4, 3, 2 REM. We should do that 4 times, and it's best to actually do that before midnight. So the quality of sleep we get before midnight is significantly better than the quality of sleep after midnight. Now, the difference, I guess, with fireys is that you come into work for night, you then don't know if you're going to sleep or not because it's incident focused. So if you are here for a night and you have done, no jobs and you've done a full night's sleep, it's still not going to be the good quality sleep. So you still need to catch up on that because you won't be getting that physical recovery even if you've slept all night because everyone would notice the difference between sleeping here at work or sleeping at home. Because there's a sense of calm in the body when you're sleeping at home, a sense of safety, whereas you're still on alert here. So the differences that makes in the brain is our brain listens, right? And if we come here and go, I'm not going to sleep, I never sleep when I'm at work, guess what? You're not going to sleep when you're at work. So we need to start retraining our self-talk where it comes to the brain because the subconscious is always listening. So if you are going to come to the fire station, you've got to do night shift, you're going to be sleeping at night, just tell yourself over and over again, I sleep well when I'm at work. I sleep well when I'm at work. Say it out loud. It's 10 times more powerful for the brain when we say something out loud than when we just ruminate over it in our head. So those sorts of things are really important when you are doing shift work because you won't be getting brain recovery and you won't be getting body recovery. So thankfully it's only a couple of nights, right? It's not like we've got a whole week and then we need to catch up on that. But basically for 16 hours awake, we need 8 hours of sleep. And that's based upon adenosine that builds up in our body. I would always say to the mining guys, it's bricks in your backpack. For every 2 hours you're awake, you put 1 brick in your backpack. And so after 16 hours awake, we've got 8 bricks in our backpack and we need an hour of sleep to get rid of the brick. So we need 8 hours of sleep to get rid of the 8 bricks. When we wake up in the morning and we feel really heavy and lethargic, we have not got rid of the adenosine. So we're starting the day with 4 or 5 bricks in our backpack, which is why we feel more fatigued rather than got rid of all my bricks and I bounce out of bed. So it's important to sort of have a look at how coffee impacts you from a physical perspective, from a mental perspective. And if it wires you, you kind of need to figure out how else to stay awake when you do come to work other than coffee.
Right. And then if we have a big night where we're up all night,
yep.
What's the best thing to do from a brain perspective the next day? Stay awake for that following day, try and get a bit of sleep, or what would you recommend?
So I would say everybody needs a nighttime routine. So you know how we do with kids. So they have a book, they brush their teeth, they may have a bath or a shower. What we do as we get older is we just sort of go, oh, it's time for bed, boom, let's go to bed. We need a routine the same way children need routines. So part of the routine, if you have had a big night and you have had a lot of jobs on that night, is to mentally debrief. And whether that's with a person or just journaling or however works for you to get it out of your mind and get it out of your body, and then start the sleep routine. For a day sleep. It's as important, if not more important, than for the night sleep. And like for some people, it can just be brushing their teeth is the brain's way of going, oh, this is what I do just before I go to sleep. And then, brush your teeth, have a warm shower. If you're ever needing to sleep during the day, you must have a warm shower before you get into bed because you have to create a sleep wave. So that's the sort of brain's receiver to go, bedtime.
Right. There you go. Thank you.
To create a sleep wave.
Right. What else?
I think in terms of, activities as well. So if people find that they come home from a night shift or even a day shift really heightened, they do need to move their body. And for a lot of people, there's a block, right? That we know all the things that we need to do. And they're like, why can't I just do it? I know I need to stretch. Why am I not doing it? I've got the time. I can create all the excuses I want. And it's just sometimes creating that habit. So to your podcast that you've recently had, creating a habit of actually going, enough's enough. I'm drawing a line in the sand. And for some people, the podcast will be that for them. They go, I can actually do something. So draw a line in the sand and go and sign up to an app or whatever. There's some really cheap ones, $15, $20, that just tells you every day, go and do that 15 minutes. I've got one at the moment. It's on somatic release. So it's releasing stored emotion in the body. It was like $15 for 4 weeks. And if you need something like that, which I do, to actually trigger action, 7 p.m. every night, it goes, do your 12, like it's 12 minutes. How on earth could I say I don't have 12 minutes? So sometimes it's like getting that reminder, having a mate that you go, all right, let's go do this ride, or let's just debrief after, let's catch up for a not coffee after we've finished the shift, just to debrief it, get it out so that you're not then taking it to bed with you.
Great advice.
Build some accountability.
Yeah.
Get someone to
Yes.
go with you.
Your accountability buddy.
So as we sort of creep towards the end of the chat, what would you recommend as a holistic approach to looking after our brain health? What are the things we can do knowing that it's inevitable we are going to be exposed to traumatic events at work, and then also on top of that, whatever happens in our outside life? What can we do to best front load ourselves for success and look after our brain and body?
Yep. So I guess front end load was the best thing to start on, because if we front end load our day with cortisol release, we are absolutely doing a beautiful service to our body. So I know the thought, like I was the person who even as a kid would not jump in a cold pool. Hated it. You know, kids don't feel the cold. I did. And I would just refuse to do it. And then my husband, being the healthy lad that he is, he didn't tell me to come in each day. He knew what it was doing for him. But then one day I just went, nah, it's enough. I'm going to do this. And actually getting in that cold pool every day, number one, I feel so proud of myself, but you can feel the cortisol release. If you actually relax into that real uncomfortable feeling, you're training your body to deal with stress. Yeah. And you'll have different areas of your body that will really lock up. Like, for example, my jaw, when I get in, just locks up, and I'm like, actually, when I'm stressed, does the same thing. So I really concentrate on relaxing that part of my body. So it's very important to set yourself up at the start of the day for success. Get up when the sun gets up. Like when we actually follow, that's when you're not on night shift, obviously, but when we actually follow what the body and the brain want to do, it is still a primitive being. We haven't evolved past our brain wanting to go to bed when the sun goes down and get up when the sun goes up. So having overhead lights on at night at home does not and will not be conducive to good sleep. Like, it does not help you sleep, because you're constantly saying to your brain, oh, it's daytime, it's time to be awake. So there's certain ways that you can set up your home for good sleep. So I guess the best things to do is know how to sleep well, get good routines to sleep well. That's the best thing for the brain, for brain recovery. Reducing stimulants and depressants so that we can have REM sleep. REM sleep is essential for brain recovery. Stage 4 sleep is essential for body recovery. So getting good amounts of sleep, front end loading your day with cortisol, eating really well. There's just so many options out there for good, healthy food that, it works against us, our body and our brain, when we're having fried fast food that doesn't, we're not supposed to have that. Our body is not built for consuming those types of foods. Water intake is incredibly important as well. We have to have hydrated muscles. We have to have that hydration in our brain. And if you are somebody who gets like headaches quite significantly throughout the day, and it's a regular thing, try some salt. So having salt either on your breakfast, because the brain expands and contracts depending upon the amount of salt in our body. So it's something that doesn't want to expand and contract, because that's what creates that pain. So I'm not saying a teaspoon of salt, just 2 salt turns on maybe some eggs for breakfast, for example. That will really assist you with sort of some of those headaches as well. So water consumption and salt tend to be 2 things that can create a lot of headaches, which also go against sleep, and it's not very good for our brain. And sunlight. We need sunlight. We have to have the vitamin D, especially as we're getting older, and our bones also need vitamin D. When we sit inside during the day, when we're looking at a computer that's, an arm's length away from us, getting outside and actually looking to the horizon also changes your brain's perspective. When we've got a pinpoint focus on something, for example, our computer, we're actually, really refining our brain's perspective to an event, and it can become quite stressful. So if we get outside in the sunlight and get that expansive view, then that actually helps the brain also relax.
Right. And you mentioned grounding before as well. So you went through the benefits of that. And then we've had a couple other people on the podcast as well talk about breath work. What about breath work for the brain?
It's sensational. Yeah. So breath work actually does produce DMT. So we naturally produce that within our body. So it can be a significant trigger for healing trauma as well. So there's a lot. So the amygdala will switch off with breath work, because your brain and your body are doing a lot of activity, but it's safe activity. And so therefore you can actually get a significant flood of previous memories also with breath work because of the DMT creation. So the brain does really well with sort of a 4-second inhalation and an 8-second exhalation. And you can do that throughout the day as well. If you are having a significant sort of stress response to something, the physiological sigh also works very well. So that's the double inhalation and then an exhalation with a sigh. So the double inhalation is the nose, and then breathing out actually breathes out some of that stored and stuck emotion that you've got in there as well. So definitely breath work is incredibly helpful for
right. That's exactly what Mandy said in our last episode.
Well, that's lucky.
It's almost like it was planned. Anything else?
No, that was really good. Thank you, Cheesy. The couple of takeaways, that I've heard you say a few times is that sunlight's really important. We can get out and do that after night shift. We tend to get up and sit around the mess table instead. We can step outside and have a look at the sun. That coffee consumption before we come in is a big one. So I think there's some really good practical tips there to look after ourselves. So thank you for sharing your knowledge and your experience with us.
And the whole part of this is just being kind to yourself. What work that you do is so incredible, and many can't do it. Right? So many can't do it. So you need to be kind to yourself when you're putting yourselves in these situations that are traumatic and difficult. And whatever we can do to increase the kindness to yourself, then let's do it.
Absolutely, I like that. And where would you recommend anyone would go if they want more information about anything that we've sort of spoken today? Can you recommend books or podcasts or websites or anything like that?
Yeah, if you're somebody that's recognizing that you do have those sore parts of your body and that you're going, maybe that is emotional. Bessel van der Kolk's Your Body Keeps the Score is a brilliant read for anyone who goes, okay, what can trauma actually do to my body? How can it present? He's done so much research with PTSD, anxiety, depression, eating disorders, all of that, and the link to trauma and how we can release it. So if we recognize that even just stretching, yoga, those types of releases of the body, there's yoga studios everywhere. There's, yoga online. I did the start of the year yoga with Adrienne. It's a 30-day thing that she does from the 1st of January every single year. And it's flow. It's beautiful. It's just something where we're really sort of giving back to ourselves and moving our body. Movement is so important. And I guess my favorite podcaster is Andrew Huberman. He is an ophthalmologist and a neuroscientist and has the most incredible guests on there. So there's majority of topics that you could ever think of, he's had a guest on to discuss. Now, the funny thing about Andrew is, as a huge academic, he asks the longest questions in history, and the guests often lose what he even asked them. I think sometimes he asks 5 questions in one question. So if you can get over that aspect of it, he's incredibly brilliant and has so much information for the public on anything science. So very well worth a listen. It's just the Huberman Lab podcast.
Beautiful. Thank you very much.
My pleasure.
And thank you for your time today. I've taken a lot away from it myself. Josh has also mentioned he has, and I'm sure Jando has too, which I think Jando's gone on a call.
No, I'm still here, mate. I'm still here.
One more thing, Cheesy.
Mm-hmm.
If someone's gravitated to you today, how can they get in touch with yourself? Are you happy to put that out there? If someone wants to engage with you or your experience or knowledge, are you happy to sort of share that, or not really?
Yeah, I think the best way to do it is through Tim.
Yep.
He will filter.
Yep.
I'll be your, what's the filter? What's our imprint?
You'll be my neocortex.
My neocortex.
There you go. Tim's running defence for Cheesy.
Yeah.
Just if we put this podcast out wider, then it's probably best not to have my specific details, but Tim certainly has my details.
Sure.
Yep.
Happy to neocortex anyone for you. Yeah. No, thank you very much, Cheesy. It was an absolute pleasure. Your level of knowledge is beyond anything that we have had around before. Josh has just thrown his water bottle on the floor. He's
fine.
Your level of knowledge is something that we really need to start to understand these things a little bit further, and I hope that everyone has taken away as much as I have. So thank you very much. You're a blessing in this world.
Thank you. It's been great.
Thanks, Cheesy.
Thank you. Bye.